Okay, so we're back with another Deep Images, and we're going to talk about an incredible topic that everyone likes to talk about, even not during Halloween, but this is starting Halloween with this vampires. Everyone does vampires. So we're trying to do some movies that, we personally like or connect with, and some of which maybe won't be on people's top vampire lists. Like we're not going to do Everybody's Get Ready to Cry. We're not going to do Bram Stoker's Dracula. We're not going to do Interview for the Vampire. We're not going to do The Lost Boys. So if that's your flex, then you probably won't like this episode, or you might like it because you'll learn about actually good vampire movie, actually good vampire movies. So
Ooh. I
anyway,
thought you said no politics.
yeah, no politics. Okay, so we're going to start with Keith. Oh, first I got to introduce this because we forgot last time with Kaelyn. So right below me on this grid is Frances Chiu. She was an original member of the gang here, and then got busy as we were going into the shooting phase. Actually, that Deadbeat at Dawn one that I did post was one you had to cancel at the last minute. So you almost made a
Yes.
film one. So now you're a film debut. So do you have anything you want to tell people about yourself?
Um, yeah, I guess
You're
I've just published a chapter on Hollywood vampires in the Paul Grave Handbook of the Vampire, and I think I sent you a copy of it too, Henry.
You
So
did, and
that's
I haven't read
out,
it yet. I did
and I'm trying to
download it.
finish. Oh, okay.
Oh, actually, I did
And
read the first
anyway,
couple paragraphs.
uh-huh. And then it got too boring, right?
No, no, I had to do other stuff, but I read the first
Oh,
two paragraphs, and I
yeah.
like the way you locate those films, like historically, like chronologically, and then you start teasing out the themes and stuff. And because I used to write this kind of stuff too. You're much better at that, and you've actually been in books. I've only been in magazines no one's heard of, but yeah. So that's I think that's why I invited you, because I was like, okay, so we've got a published author who knows a lot about the lore of the classic and gothic vampire stuff. So, and we're going to share movies with each other that we may not know about, or have seen. So same
Eh,
thing we usually
yeah,
do.
one warning, there's a lot of politics in mine.
Okay.
It's all good.
1960s
We're
and
here.
70s politics, not
We're
contemporary, but
right. We're here for it. We're going to start with Keith, our panel moderator. He's got a couple of classics he wants to talk about. I think
All
they're
right.
classic.
Well, they are classics. Now your mileage may vary on how good they are for if you're a vampire aficionado, but I think they're both excellent vampire movies to watch. The first one is 1972's Blacula, which is a movie that I became aware of when I was a little kid, primarily because of those scholastic books that you could get in school. You fill out the little things, send them in. And I had a little book on movie monsters that I had ordered that it had a page on there where it was going through all the different monsters, Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, all that. And and it had a page on Blacula. So I was aware of it, but I'd never seen it. So
Mhm.
it looked interesting to me at the time, and that would have been the early 70s, right around this time, probably a couple
Did you
years
ever see
after
the
this.
trailer when it was running?
No, no. So I didn't, but I was into the movie scene, but it was a few years later. I think I may have either
You were really
seen,
young though.
yeah, I'd either seen or seen the trailer of the sequel on the Blackula, which I
Okay.
don't recommend. But I didn't ever get around to watching Blackula finally until during COVID, when I finally sat down and watched it for the first time. And I was expecting, basically a spoof of some kind. That it
Right.
was that it's deep in the blaxploitation
Mhm.
phase of films, and so I was kind of expecting a lot of jokiness and winking at the audience, kind of stuff. But it shocked me how straight this thing is played, and
Mhm.
how much William Marshall plays this character with a ridiculous name like Blackula, with just this regality and elegance and authority, and he carries this movie through in such a way that you don't ever laugh at it. You're watching this, and it's a
Uh,
dead
he's a
serious.
tragic figure.
Yeah, it's a dead serious
Of
vampire
course, he's hardly
movie.
ever called Blackula in the film. He's usually called by his real name, Mama
Right,
Walde.
exactly. He's an African prince, and that's what I was
Mamuwalde.
going to say. For the background on people, he's an African prince from the late 1700s who goes to see Dracula in Dracula's castle in Transylvania. And in the court, this is how the movie opens. So this is how you get started. And there's a certain point where Dracula kind of is very racist and makes racist comments towards Prince Mamuwalde and his wife, his beautiful wife, and then he starts making horn dog comments towards his wife, and starts then to such a degree he makes jokes about slavery and things like that to him, and it becomes very uncomfortable to the point where Mamuwalde is like, "We're leaving," that kind of thing, and that's when Dracula sort of like reveals himself to be who he is, and kind of decides, "I'm gonna punish you by making you a vampire," and then chaining him into a coffin, Barnabas Collins style, where he's going to suffer with the hunger of the undead forever and ever and ever, right? And he does. He says, "I'm going to curse you with my name, BLACULA," and then the credits roll and the movie gets started, right?
It's an incredible scene.
I mean, it's just like
opening.
Dracula is just so
he's there because he's trying to get noblemen to support his cause against the slave trade,
and he's and Dracula is just dripping and oozing with racism. And so he becomes like this metaphor for American racism, obviously, at the time period here.
Imperialism,
right?
It's really Eastern European racism, but
and the dude who plays Dracula, also, he's only on screen for a few minutes there, but God, he gives it 110%. He just really just eats it all up, and he's never playing it for laughs. I mean, he is dead serious in this thing, and he is a serious threat, is all I'm saying. So it's a really good way of establishing that this movie's not going to be a joke right off the bat. So as the movie unfolds, we get into the 70s, and Blackula the Prince Mamuwalde gets brought back, and I don't need to give all the details on that, but
right,
as that unfolds, it's just
that part was slightly comical.
I mean, that's where
and very dated.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This movie has casual homophobia throughout, and it
hinges on those two characters,
and it makes it uncomfortable now to watch that a little bit. But I get context of the times when movies are made, but it is interesting how this movie is making such a strong commentary on racism, and it's so just casually homophobic at the same time.
But that's been in the culture sometimes.
Yeah. You do get
but,
that a lot. Like, you can go really hard against one form of bigotry while still perpetuating another form of bigotry.
Exactly.
And it goes both ways with that. Like, as a member of the queer community, it's like, can confirm white queer people can be very racist. Like, it's a very, very big problem that we have,
Yeah, and it also
it's an interracial couple. I think the black guy was much more stereotypical than the white guy.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, the white guy was fairly just a regular gay guy, just with wild clothing, but the black guy was really over the top fabulous.
Yeah, both of them playing themselves, very ridiculous. But but again, I don't think they were necessarily they weren't going for spoof. It's just the time period, 72. It's what you got in a movie like this. But but the movie itself is really steeped in the Los Angeles black culture. There's a lot of cool funky music. I mean, the funk is strong in this movie, and so it's worth watching just for the soundtrack sometimes.
I've got it.
That's what I'm saying. So
I figured you did.
It's really good, but I'm also struck by how much they were just ripping off Dan Curtis and Dark Shadows. I mean, considering it's 1972, and you've got Mamuwalde getting stuck in the coffin that's chained shut, and then you also have the whole basically the the queen or the wife who gets reincarnated into the same actress in the modern day, and he's obsessed with getting her to remember who she is. The exact same thing that we had going on with Barnabas.
That's a classic trope.
Well, that just finished at that time, didn't it?
But it doesn't.
Dark Shadows.
It's it would have just finished right around this time. I think that this one came out, and it's not a trope in the Dracula novel. I mean, he's not chasing after his,
though they did put it in Coppola's movie,
but it winds up in all of the movies now. It's like
that was trope, Richard Matheson's idea originally.
That trope has now become the norm, and they've assigned it retroactively to Dracula a lot. It's also plays out in the next movie I'm going to talk about as well, the same trope.
And it's also in Candyman.
Yes.
The first Candyman it is, but you have to watch it a few times to really, really, I think, put it together, because it's not as overt as like the movies we're talking about. But by the end of the movie,
of the time, because that's like when you had films like On a Clear Day You Can See Forever that was all about reincarnation.
Oh, there were a bunch of those movies. But go ahead, Keith.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just I recommend people watch it. I think it's a great snapshot of the time period. First of all, but be prepared. No, it's going to be, if you're sensitive to homophobia, it's pretty casual and throughout. But I think if you really just watch it and can handle that, you're going to get a movie that's pretty creepy a lot of the times. And you've got the BLACULA character just super strong. He's the guy who played was it on Star Trek? The Daystrom. He played Daystrom.
That's an important character.
Daystrom Institute and stuff like that. And he in that one you'll remember he just gave one of those big, just major Star Trek performances, right? That you had sometimes those guest stars that come on. William Wyndham.
Yeah, I loved it when Kelsey Grammer appeared. That was memorable. He was one time. He was so great.
Well, I'm talking old school, old series, okay?
Yeah, I know he was in the older one.
Yeah. So when William Marshall,
and you didn't have any
I
black
did find it really sad when Mama Waldy kills the gay couple and they have to have separate funerals because the funeral parlor only does black people and the other only does white people.
Yeah, but William Marshall's voice, if he's got that deep baritone. He's 6'5", so he has this huge presence. He towers over everybody in every scene, and so it's like I wish they could have done more. The one thing though I can't figure out, and you might see it on my background, I can't figure out what's up with the hair on his cheeks.
Well,
so when he would go into vampire mode, all of a sudden hair would show up on his cheeks.
Yeah.
Up in here.
Yeah.
Well, I can offer an explanation in hindsight is that what Joss Whedon called the game face. So when the vampires go into their bloodlust mode, their face becomes more bestial, and he's one of the first examples of that.
Well,
that I can think of.
There is that, but it just seems weird to me how we've got the
hair
that just shows up like that instead of going in a different. I don't know. It just seems weird, like these patches.
But it's part of his afro. It's the time too.
Yeah, but I would have expected it to be connected.
Right. Connected, like a little bit more.
Yeah,
looking like, all of your hair is just getting longer, therefore you have facial hair now. Patches are kind of odd.
He's very
well. You got to remember. He can't stop and look in a mirror and touch it up.
Yeah, that's true.
But he does.
Let me just comb real quick.
He does go back and forth. Yes, he goes into his normal human mode. He's a very attractive man, and then he goes into that vampiric mode, and he gets very bestial. And the fangs are good. The whole effect with the fangs. There's even some of his wife or Dracula's wives, and then some of the other vampire, especially the women. They have those really long fangs like that.
That was out of a Paul Naschy movie.
Yeah, and they would do this blue makeup on them, and it just made them look so creepy.
That's also Paul.
I can imagine being in the movie theater and seeing that for the first time. It would have probably creeped me out major.
The trailer is actually, I think, scary and creepy. When the nurse is running down the hallway screaming and the music
that scene is something else. I mean,
if you watch that trailer, you're not going to think it's a spoof.
Right. But I had never seen that, so I didn't know that. But I'll tell you, that scene is legit scary. I don't know what she was thinking when she did that, but that was that way they just slow it down and they just have her, they just hold on to her as she's coming towards the camera. It was like, that's scary.
That is terrifying. Yeah. Like anything where people are like coming towards the camera, it's just like, oh, whoa, you're coming at me. This is making it like too real. Yeah.
Yeah. The sound was really working. Yeah, that's another thing. The sound is interesting on this because it's so low budget. And they obviously didn't want to spend a lot of money on ADR, so you get a lot of echoing with the room and background noise that you would normally not have, sound of traffic out there that you would normally not have getting picked up by the mic. So there's in a way, again, it on one hand it's quaint, but on your other hand it adds realism to it and authenticity to it, which is part of what I like about some of these low budget movies like that. There's an authenticity to it sometimes because they're not quite so clean and slick like that. So depending on your own personal taste, just be prepared. It's not going to have that perfect remastered studio sound, But
the thing is, a lot of those. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and get this out of the way because I'm going to talk about a similar movie to you. This blaxploitation. I've seen 200 of them, so I had to collect lists for years and go by them. So, and they're not all squarely blaxploitation. We won't get into all that. But the raw ones, the rawer. I don't want to say the rawer the better, but when I find one that's rawer than anyone I've seen before it, it's kind of hypnotic to me, even if the movie kind of sucks because it's like it's in such a deranged space. Like it's authentic, but it's also like kind of otherworldly because it's just like Jamafanaka's movie Welcome Home Brother Charles. It's about as raw as you can get, but it's really well made. The Dolomite movies are raw and not very well made. However, they're well performed and written, for what they are. And there are times in BLACULA that remind me of just the general maybe level of production value. The scenes where you got the Los Angeles socialites, they probably spent their whole budget on that party and the makeup for the
well, it's like Eddie Murphy's Vampire in Brooklyn, I think was his attempt to take something like BLACULA and upgrade it. But this works better than Vampire in Brooklyn, even on the low budget and everything that it has going against it, it's a more effective film.
It was a success. It made a lot of money. He had a huge profit, not as huge as Superfly's profit. That was out. Right. Because Superfly probably had a lower budget than BLACULA. You don't know it. It had great production values, but then it got picked up by Warner, and everyone in the world knows Superfly. But BLACULA didn't get to that level, but he did become iconic. And that one movie I know made a lot of money. I don't know if the sequel was successful.
Yeah, BLACULA Scream is not as good. I'll just say that.
I like it sometimes. I've seen it like 4 times. So the first time I saw it, I like it, but I was disappointed. Second time, I liked it better. And I'm mainly concentrating on Pam Grier, of course. And then the third time, I was like, this really isn't very good. But the last time I saw it, I'm digging into the story, and I'm like, the whole story with her and the voodoo and Mama Baldi, and the production values on that one were better than the original one. They weren't as creative, but I think overall, for people who like the first one, even though I do like BLACULA Scream, it is a disappointment. It's a letdown by comparison, big time. It's a missed opportunity, kind of.
Now, the other movie that
I just want to say it's important to note that William Crane is I believe he's one of the few blaxploitation directors who is actually black. And
interesting.
Is William Crane black? See, I didn't know that.
Yes, he is. And he also made a short film you should check out called Greenhouse. If you can, I got it through Interlibrary Loan, but you have to watch it on VHS. But they showed it to us in first grade. It's about this kid who smashes up a greenhouse, and then he has to help out the guy. And that was directed by William Crane. And it has this really effective opening where it's like all these shots of rocks going through a greenhouse.
I bet that was fun to film.
He made another horror movie or exploitation movie, but I can't remember what it was. It wasn't like a standout. But anyway, go ahead, Keith.
I was going to transition over to my next one, which is a few years after this, 1979. We're coming into the end of the 70s with Love at First Bite. which I'll mention a few things before we talk about the movie itself. Is that when I was looking up some stuff, discovered it was originally supposed to be called Dracula Sucks. Now, if anybody's as old as I am, and from then you would also know that at that same time, if you had porno drive-ins in your area as I did, there was a movie called Dracula Sucks that came out around the same time. That was I don't remember if it was hardcore porn or softcore porn, but it had yeah,
I figured you would have.
So from what I could gather, this is one of those weird, funny turns of events. It looks like they started production as Dracula Sucks, then Dracula Sucks came around, so they had to change the title. So they went clever with Love at First Bite, and then this became a big hit. So the next thing you know, Dracula Sucks gets re-released under the title of Lust at First Bite.
Oh, that was the same movie?
Yeah, it's the same movie. So that's just one of those funny things. The another interesting just sidebar thing about Love at First Bite is that there's an iconic scene in the movie that has that there's a dance scene with Dracula and Susan St. James, George Hamilton, Susan St. James, where they're dancing to the song I Love the Nightlife, and it's sung by Alicia Bridges. And is classic. The song was a huge hit on the top 40 pop charts. Disco song. And it's one of those things that where contractually, when we switched over from video cassette to digital media, apparently nobody was able to pay what they wanted to pay to get the song transition, because the contracts didn't cover digital media yet. So all the DVD versions of this movie have always had a substitute song in there that sucks. And it doesn't.
Is it similar in style?
No, it's not even similar in style, but apparently it fits the beat, or so that their feet aren't completely off.
That's disappointing. I wonder if they renegotiated it for the Blu-ray.
Well, that's what nope, not even for the Blu-rays, but let me tell you what did happen. Shout Factory or Scream Factory somehow was able to get the rights and get this thing returned to the original song on this, and only this one. You have to buy it. You have to buy it in the double feature with Once Bitten, this
which is tolerable, but
this Lauren Hutton and early Jim Carrey movie. So you have to buy it as a double. That
is so cool. You have that. I've been wanting that for ages.
This is not available on its own with the original music, and even on this they've remastered it, so it sounds better than it ever sounded before. So it's a remaster on the song, for digital media, so it sounds great. And so I was very happy to finally get to see it again like that. So if you're a fan of the movie, it's worth getting this version of it. I guess
the song will become an earworm.
Yeah,
it was. They're gonna run
at the time. When I was junior high school, I got to where I hated the song because it was everywhere. It was one of those songs. But anyway,
we ended up.
Anyway, Love at First Bite is a I don't know. I guess it's a spoof. I mean, it's I can't decide if it's a parody or a spoof, but there are times where it almost seems like it's not either. It's just a comedy starring Dracula, which is not quite a spoof, but there's moments where they have these elements of it being a spoof or a parody. So it's a weird mix like that. But
do you feel like Hamilton plays it straight?
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. I just watched it again a few days ago, and I'm going to say, I think that's why it works. That's why it works because George Hamilton and Susan St. James play their parts 100% straight in character all the time. That allows people like Artie Johnson to do an over-the-top parody of Renfield from the old Dracula movie with Bela Lugosi. That's why you're able to get Richard Benjamin playing Susan's boyfriend / psychiatrist or whatever, why he can be just completely over the top also, because those two, Dracula and I've forgotten her character name, Cindy Sondheim. Yeah. So you get Dracula and Cindy both being played totally straight in this ridiculous scenario, and that's what anchors this movie and makes it work. I think without that, it would have turned into just mugging at the camera and all that kind of stuff, and you just really don't get that.
It definitely has a story.
Yeah, it's got your basic story, right? George Hamilton's Dracula gets the homeowners association kicks him out of the castle, basically. But it's actually the Soviet
the Communist Party, actually.
Yes.
The Communist Party.
Yes. That happened to me in real life.
Which I actually had to go look it up to make sure that Transylvania or Romania was actually a part of the Soviet bloc, and I was able to find it at the time. Romania was never officially a part of the USSR, but there was a communist control of a certain,
it was behind the Iron Curtain.
Yeah, and there was this block of Romania that was, so I was like, okay, I guess they knew what they were doing. But yes, they came in kind of acting like the homeowners association and evicted him from his castle. So
there's a great film called Videograms of a Revolution.
Well,
it's about Ceausescu's overthrow. It's a documentary.
Oh, cool. What'd you say, Francis?
Yeah, I was going to say what's really interesting about this is that in the earlier, like in the 1950s and early 60s, there was always a sort of vague association between communism and vampires. I mean, if you look at...
Yeah, and they made one movie about it, Jonathan.
Actually,
if I'm correct.
Like the Brides of Dracula and Brides of Dracula, they use all this lingo that's kind of associated with, I don't know, it was Edgar Hoover's, he had one book that was published in 1958 about, how to track down communists and how to report them and all this kind of stuff. But the way that he writes about it, well, actually, I'll just put this way, the way that the person, whoever it was, Hammer, I guess, all the directors who made those,
that was one of the first
almost like they
Brides.
read Hoover. And it has all these things about communists are hypnotists. They break apart the party. They break apart your family and their bloodlust, all this sort of stuff. So I've always wondered if these early
they're feeding on the underclass.
Like communist feeding, And so it's kind of interesting to see something like something like Love at First Sight, where actually the communists are opposed to Dracula.
Right.
That's what I found interesting.
But in this case, it's just because they want his castle so they can, their gymnastics team can work out.
Yeah, it's for the absurdest reasons.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, an interesting point about that too is that.
Wait, hold on. Francis.
The communist had sort of disappeared too. So I think that makes a difference. I think that's where you have this different attitude. Okay. So sorry, go on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. Kaelyn, what were you gonna say?
Sure. The other interesting thing about that with the vampires being kind of associated with communists is that you also see a lot of vampirism being associated with aristocracy. So it's really interesting having this political theory that's all about the working class and all about the common people being associated with this thing that's also associated very much with the bourgeoisie. It's an interesting kind of turning it on its head.
Yeah.
Can I mention a movie and ask if any of y'all have seen it? Have you seen Jonathan from the mid-70s? Is a German movie?
No, I haven't.
It's very infamous as a cult movie, but it's hard to track down. And I think at one time I started watching on YouTube and then I went back and they pulled it, but it's told from the point of view of Jonathan Harker, and Dracula is either a Nazi or a communist or some kind of similar kind of totalitarian, and it is that metaphor for him being part of the bourgeoisie and everything, feeding off the underclass. But it's supposed to be really great. I love the trailer, but it's hard to find. But
I'm intrigued.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll get it one day. So, Keith, you want to continue, Love?
Sure. Okay. So, all that being said, that's just an excuse in the very beginning to do as the setup for the movie and somehow get Dracula to America, because that's what we want. So we've got him pining away for a model that he looks at, that he sends Renfield out to get Vogue magazines and things like that, so he can just kind of drool over this girl. And then, later we understand part of that is because she looks just like his former love from centuries ago before he became a vampire. So he feels like it's her spirit reincarnated in Cindy Sonai. So, I mean, that's the basic setup. But, you get him into America and just comedy ensues. Again, you get some casual racism in the humor, in this one. But at the same time, it's not deeply offensive, but it's a little stereotypical. I don't think it's
like stereotypes.
Yeah, it's stereotypical and less racist, I think, because I don't think there's a real sense of superiority happening here. I think it's just kind of playing with it. But I think our sensitive times today, people probably would perceive it as racist humor. I think it's more stereotypical humor, and you can either giggle at it or ignore it. That's kind of my attitude.
Right. I wanted to ask you something, Keith.
Yeah. Stereotypes.
Go ahead, Francis.
Stereotypes actually do in some ways derive from racist assumptions.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
There's that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Keith, I thought of the humor when he comes to New York or wherever. I felt it was a fish out of water thing, the culture clash thing. They did an issue. They did an issue of the Tomb of Dracula comic. I've got pictured there where he lost his. Well, he came back to life, so he was no longer a vampire, and he's never been around modern New Yorkers. He just stalks them, and he's like, "Oh, I got to buy food. What am I going to do?" That's a brilliant.
Well, I'll tell you, and again, it has to do with the time period in which the movie was made too, because there's a couple of sequences, like when he first starts walking through town after he wakes up, because there's a hilarious switcheroo with the coffins. If you haven't watched the movie, Renfield gets the wrong coffin off the plane and takes it back to his hotel thinking it's his master, and the other coffin winds up at a funeral at a black church, and they're which you have the comedic moment of Dracula popping up out of there, good evening, and sending everybody running away. And it's really funny. It's a really funny moment, actually. But then after that, he has to go walking the streets of New York to find Renfield at the hotel, right? And so he runs into a group of black youths who are looting. They're knocking out windows and wanting to grab things, and they try to mug him and stuff like that. And so very, again, stereotypical stuff. And then later there's also a whole sequence where the humor revolves around and the plot actually revolves around New York going into a blackout for a little bit. And in 1979, everybody understood New York had a looting and a mugging problem. They also had blackout problems. This was in 1979.
That was 1975, right?
Yeah,
badly run city. Great city,
there was like a period there in the latter part of the 70s where New York was notorious for this stuff. So the movie, yes, like I said, it's almost casual racism in that sense, but it's also a casual New Yorkism of the time, because it was what everybody thought of when you said New York City. You thought about all of this stuff, right? And so they kind of played it, and Dracula gives them their comeuppance and all of that. The whole sequence where they call him a honky, and he goes, "What is this honky?" He doesn't know what they're even saying, right? It's really a funny bit.
If the movie was made in the 80s, he'd have been accosted by punk rockers, because they always made them the bad guys on the streets hassling people.
Well,
and rarely was true.
If it had been made in the 80s, they also would have gone to Los Angeles, not New York, probably.
Exactly.
That's another thing.
I did just see a clip of the Jason Takes Manhattan where he messes with some punks.
There you go.
It popped up on YouTube.
I think the movie works on so many levels, and part of it, why it works, is that they filmed so much of it actually in New York City, as opposed to the backlot. So while you've got sets and backlots, there's so much that's actually in New York City, and you can't reproduce that feeling unless it's there. And it really does help. And George Hamilton God bless him, this is probably the best performance he ever gave is in this movie, and he gave it everything he had, and it is just fantastic because he doesn't play Dracula for laughs. When like when Leslie Nielsen did his version of Dracula, he's looking at the camera and all that. It's it's like a Three Stooges version of Dracula. But no, this guy, he took it seriously. He's in character every moment, even when he kind of makes an aside to the camera. It's still in character. Right. It's not one of those things where he breaks the fourth wall in that sense. He's still in character.
It's kind of like Bela Lugosi and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, where he is Dracula.
He's just playing it
very good. I thought his performance in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was excellent.
It's fantastic. That's why Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is such a classic, because the monsters are all playing it straight. They're letting Abbott and Costello be the comedy. And so in this one, it's kind of the same way. You've got Dracula being played pretty much just straight. And he's surrounded by a bunch of wackies, and Artie
his
Johnson,
reactions to the city or whether a lot of the humor.
Yeah, and to those around him, his treatment of Renfield is authentic, and Renfield is just the same Renfield from the Lugosi movie, but just over the top. He just takes it up a notch, but it's the same kind of thing, But the humor sometimes it's lowbrow, sometimes it's clever wordplay, whatever. But it's a clever movie that is not it's not life-changing. Susan St. James is sublime. I mean, for what she's doing, she's playing this fancy model, that whole sequence, man, I was 13 when I first saw this. I'm telling you, when she took that wig off and she had her normal hair and she's just wearing her thing and she's smoking a joint, and I'm like,
I was a little younger than that, but yeah, I kind of remember it being.
I mean, I got what Dracula was grooving on. I mean,
well, were you familiar with her from Macmillan and Wife? Because I was.
Yes, I knew who she was
because I already had a crush on her from Macmillan and Wife.
Yeah, but this was different. This was this was her being sexy, and even when she was trying to not be, she was being sexy, and it's fun to watch her with Rosenberg, Jeffrey, her boyfriend, who's also her real life husband. They're playing those scenes together. Those were it's so funny when she's in his psychiatrist's office and he's just so inappropriate with her as her psychiatrist. It's like
what is that line?
That whole interchange.
You don't feel better until you pay. You don't feel better until you pay, or something like that.
I mean, it's such a toxic relationship, and it's so funny.
Richard Benjamin was perfect for those.
He was so perfect.
Diary of a Mad Housewife, man, he is just a hateable, whiny, controlling dude. But then sometimes he's sympathetic and nerdy, but it's funny in Westworld because he's the nerdy guy, and then James Brolin, manly man, they wipe him out. So Richard Benjamin has to figure out, how the hell do I survive with my lack of very tiny survival skills.
And and of course, in one of my favorite movies of all time, The Last of Sheila, Richard Benjamin, he just he's aces in that.
What movie?
Yeah, The Last of Sheila. Have you never seen that?
I've seen it
once. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's one of my favorite movies of all
time.
Stephen
Sondheim wrote the script, I believe.
Yeah, and it is thinly veiled parodies of real life people, including Sondheim himself. Yeah, and I mean, if you know who they're playing, then you'll go, we're learning some dirty secrets about some people. Anyway, it's a good one. It's worth watching. If you're a movie buff, you really got to see Last of Sheila. But anyway, this movie it's one of those. It's a feel good movie. It's one of those that I can just plop down and watch anytime, anywhere. I don't even have to see it from the beginning. I can pop in at any point because I know it inside and out. Saw it in the theater multiple times. It's just one of those movies. But I, highly,
Was it a big hit? I mean, was it really popular?
Yeah, it was very popular. Yeah. It was very popular. I mean, everybody knew about it. Let's see, it cost $3 million.
It was shown on TV a lot.
It made $44 million, so that's a huge profit in 1979 dollars. Yeah, that was enormous. But the special effects aren't that great, but you don't care because it's funny. You know, it's funny when it needs to be funny. It's sympathetic when it needs to be sympathetic. You know, the whole falling in love. You know, you could have had a whole thing because they were establishing him and his hypnotic gaze and stuff. They could have had him try to, you know, seduce her that away, but they made sure he respected her. He didn't want to do that. He wanted her to love him for himself, not because he was making, you know, so you have that little bit of action going on. And so it's a little bit deeper than you would expect there. One of my funniest gags in this movie that I have referenced my entire life is about Rosenberg, you know, trying to throw his cross at him, and he's got his Jewish Star of David because it turns out his family's Jewish, you know. And in case you don't know, the big spoiler, of course, is that Rosenberg is actually a Van Helsing. So of course, you know, and
the Star of David did hurt Dracula, right? Because he believed in it. Isn't that correct?
No.
Oh, it didn't repel him? Okay.
No. You're mixing up Fright Night with this one. The logic of Fright Night.
Gotcha.
I like that logic.
But
you know, the fearless vampire killers uses a similar gag with a Jewish vampire who
Greenberg the vampire
by the cross.
There's Greenberg the vampire, the Jewish vampire, which is a lot of fun too, but that's not in this movie. So what else can I say? I mean, it's funny, it's touching, it's a classic. Oh, it's got Dick Shawn, who's one of my favorite comic actors of all time in it. If there's anything that keeps it from being a perfect movie, maybe the speed in which everything happens. They don't fully develop some things, like the relationship between Richard Benjamin's character, Dr. Rosenberg, and Dick Shawn's character, the Lieutenant Ferguson of the NYPD. Although there's a hilarious sequence between the two of them when they first meet, but there's a relationship that develops that seems like instant later, that I feel like maybe there was something cut, they hit the cutting room floor to develop that a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen that, but it doesn't matter because, the pacing of the movie is exactly what it needs to get you across the finish line in, 94 minutes. It's a tight 90.
If I'd written it, I would have just had those two characters have an affair. But that wasn't that common back then.
Yeah, nowadays, yeah.
I mean,
they should have had a moment. They should have had a moment with the two of them at the very end, looking at each other, where you realize,
Dracula's gone.
We're into each other.
Yeah. It's beautiful, like in Hannibal.
But yeah,
all right, so Keith,
both BLACULA and Love at First Bite are really good snapshots of two different ends of the 70s spectrum. So you got 72 with BLACULA, 79 with Love at First Bite. They're good little snapshots of the world at the time that they were made. They have some commentary on the time that when they were made. So they're they are sort of stuck in their time. They're not timeless. So if you're going to watch them, you're going to get some insight and enjoy it from that perspective, I think.
Part of my brain is stuck in the 70s, so I'll be okay.
What's that, Francis?
I was going to say, Love at First Bite is actually made just right around before, you think about the election of Reagan. So there's this kind of current of conservatism that you notice in there. Like, I think you have like Cindy Sonham saying like, well, I don't really want to be independent. I want to be a wife too, or something along those lines. So I sort of thought that and a kind of race humor just really made you think, yeah, this is like definitely late 70s and not early 70s.
Well, she's also
it's a decadent disco era going.
Well, she's also casually tossing back shot, guzzling vodka from a bottle and then snorting coke, and then also digging out a joint. All in one swoop. Guzzle, snort.
I forgot that. That's awesome.
I mean, and that's her getting ready to go have sex with a guy she literally just met.
Well, how do you feel about
George Hamilton goes on does Zorro the Gay Blade? So
and that was the follow
the gay stereotype, which is funny because I was watching Joker, and that's the version Bruce Wayne sees as Zorro the Gay Blade.
Yeah. Well, isn't George Hamilton fairly a kind of a conservative in Hollywood? I don't know, but I think he.
I don't know.
Well, he's when I think about George Hamilton, he's like a guy who basically wants to be a celebrity and wants to be George Hamilton. So he acts a little bit, makes some money, buys a few houses, gets his facelift, his hair really done. Then he goes out and just lives his life as George Hamilton for 3 or 4 years. Then somebody calls him or he needs work.
Part of what I like about
he doesn't have a big resume.
No, but part of what I really like about him in this movie, besides the fact that he gives it, all, is that you get him pre-faceless, other than probably a nose job. I'm betting he had a nose job by then. But you get him before he's chopped up his face, and you get him
and he's all tan.
Yeah, you get him completely still in his prime physically, so he's like thin and lithe and tall, and so you've got him really at his peak, I would think, and all of that. And yes, they use the makeup to to tone down his tan as Dracula. So they've got that white kind of makeup to get him to lighten him up, so you don't get any of that sense of the George Hamilton suntan. And it's just a little different. That they got that wig on him, gives him that really big widow's peak, which it's funny that we have that.
Isn't some of that his real hair though?
I don't know. It looked to me like it could have just been a funky on. It might have been. It might have been.
But I think bad about telling that.
I think it's interesting because we think of Dracula with the widow's peak. You can see the picture back here with BLACULA with a widow's peak, but Bela Lugosi didn't have a widow's peak. It's not a widow's peak. It's it's straight across there. I've drawn his head.
Did Christopher Lee? I don't think Christopher Lee did.
Yeah, I don't think he did either.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny that we associate that with Dracula, because it doesn't go back to Lugosi. It doesn't go back to Christopher Lee. I don't know where it comes from.
I want to say there's been like a lot of like drawn images of Dracula in things where he's like drawn with a widow's peak.
I always draw him that way.
Yeah, look at that.
He's
one
not described that way.
Dracula.
Yeah.
He's not described that way in the novel.
Yeah, in the book he has a mustache and a beard.
Yeah, he's got a bushy mustache, and
like absolutely nothing like you imagine Dracula looking.
No.
He actually,
so Gary Oldman was correct casting, kind of.
The Dracula at the beginning of BLACULA looks a lot like how the books describe him. If you
have you seen? I know some of you guys have seen Jess Franco's straight adaptation, Count Dracula, from the 70s.
Yeah,
he looks correct in that. Christopher Lee made that decision.
Yeah, he does,
and he does get progressively younger. Unlike, not to the extent Gary Oldman did, but I want to say something about Tomb of Dracula. I'm going to say more about it later. But see, that widow's peak in his look. Gene Colan, drew everything from life, unlike say Jack Kirby, out of his head. So Gene Colan patterned him after Jack Palance.
Yes, because
then coincidentally. No, the TV movie came after he did that.
Are you sure?
I am certain. I've read how way weird it is. It's close. It's really close.
Yeah, okay.
So I don't know if it's a coincidence or if it's Dan Curtis saw that image and thought, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Gene Colan's just like, I'm going to give Jack Palance a mustache. And over the years, he looks a little less like him, but he's still.
Well, yeah, because as after so many years of drawing him, he had developed his own face. That happens.
Yes.
If you're drawing the same character, they're gonna change. Even Peanuts did that. Until you find their face. But yeah, Palance was his inspiration.
I liked that one.
Yeah. That was a fairly decent